Are you hungry? The roast beef is ours, so we won't give any to you, Mom. While I was preparing Christmas dishes in the kitchen, my eldest son, James, blurted that out. As he casually opened the fridge, he stowed away the paper-wrapped package he had brought. Roast beef? I bought it as a snack for the drinks. But Mom, you're not allowed to touch it. His mocking tone made me snap. It's not that I desperately wanted to eat the roast beef. It was James's spitefulness in telling me not to eat it that infuriated me. Why am I even preparing Christmas dishes while being treated like this? How dare you speak to me that way? I'm not your servant, you know. But if you don't take care of me and Emily, Dad will get upset. You won't even take care of your son and daughter-in-law when they come home for a visit, will you? James's words made me bristle with anger again. Didn't I just say I'm not your servant? I have a home to return to as well. Yes, I'm going back to my hometown. Your hometown? It's just Aunt Michelle living there alone, right? Spending Christmas with just elderly sisters? How creepy. With that, James spat out and quickly left the kitchen. Heading back to the dining room where my husband and his wife, Emily, were. I'm so glad our kitchen is separate from the dining area. Because it means I don't have to see the three of them ignoring me and enjoying their drinks. Why do I have to cook for James and Emily only to be treated like this? It's infuriating. How can I unleash this anger on James and Emily? If possible, I'd like to mix a little poison into the Christmas dishes and their drinks. Wait. The Christmas dishes. And the drinks. The idea of adding a little poison. Suddenly, an idea crossed my mind. Maybe I could give my son and his wife a shock. I'm Catherine, a 62-year-old housewife. I work part-time 3 days a week at a printing company. My husband, George, is also still working post-retirement, so we're both still working. When our only son, James, got married, my husband was overjoyed. Because his daughter-in-law, Emily, was a heavy drinker. He's always so happy to have a daughter who can drink all night long, lining up bottles of liquor in anticipation of her visits. This Christmas too, he was in a good mood since morning, having ordered wine and beer. But ever since James brought Emily home for the first time, I've disliked her. To be honest, it's not easy to find a girl willing to marry an only son. Emily said that to me while we were having tea on the couch. She started talking when my husband and James left the room. So, I hope you understand that now that I'm your daughter-in-law. What do you mean? It means if you let me go, you might never find another daughter-in-law. It took me a moment to grasp the meaning of her words. Basically, Emily was saying that she married James, and I should appreciate her for it. I'm planning to take good care of you too, you know. Of course, you should. As you get older and need help, you'll have to rely on us, right? Emily looked down on me with disdainful eyes. So, while you're healthy, please devote yourself to us. That's what give and take is all about, isn't it? You don't have to speak to me that way. It's exactly that attitude I'm talking about. Haven't you ever heard the saying, obey your children as you age? What on earth is wrong with this kid? Just so you know, James is crazy about me. Even if you say bad things about me or complain, he won't believe you. As I was at a loss for words, my husband and James returned to the living room. Emily, did you have a good talk with Mom?
Yeah.
Your mom said she'll be kind to us. Emily's expression and tone of voice changed completely. A beaming smile and a coquettish voice. With this act, she could probably easily manipulate James. Disturbed, I later talked to my husband about it. Well, Emily does have a point. But my husband, excited about his drinking daughter-in-law, didn't listen to me at all. It's a fact that we'll have to rely on James and Emily in our old age, and it's rare for young women to want to marry an only son. But she was so unpleasant in her wording. Aren't you just jealous of Emily, thinking she's stealing James from you? It's time you let go of your child. In the end, my feelings were ignored, and James and Emily had their wedding. I can't forget the look Emily gave me as she walked down the aisle. It's time to start treating me like a princess. I could read that thought in her disdainful gaze. Every Easter, summer holiday, and Christmas, my eldest son and his wife visit. Each time, my husband asks me to prepare special meals. Make something delicious so we can enjoy our drinks. Afraid to upset my usually quiet husband, I began to prepare elaborate welcome meals. Emily apparently mistook me for a maid. Catherine, I want to change the flavor of the pasta. Could you grate some cheese for me? We don't have any cheese right now. Then can you go buy some? Catherine, can you buy some for her? Emily's keeping you company with the drinks. My husband always spoils his daughter-in-law. And the drinking trio, including James, eat a lot. There's still food left, I'll take it. Even what I set aside for myself, James would take from the kitchen. I ended up eating toast. Every long weekend it's like this, and I've come to dread their visits. At the same time, I feel sad about feeling this way. This Christmas too, the drinking started as soon as my eldest son and his wife arrived. George, wanting to drink with Emily, had been eagerly waiting since morning. Catherine, please take good care of us this year too. Are the Christmas dishes ready? That was Emily's greeting when she entered the kitchen. I'm still making them. I'd be happy if you could help. I can't enter someone else's kitchen. She sits and eats all she wants in someone else's home, but I held back from saying that. Emily, unconcerned with my reaction, quickly went back to George. Then I heard my husband's voice from the dining room. Hey, Catherine. Bring the wine and glasses. He was referring to the cheap glass flask and cups we won in a supermarket raffle at the end of the year. He said they were perfect for drinking during the Christmas since the set included 3 cups. Does this mean I was never included in their gathering from the start? As I carried the tray with the flask and cups to the dining room, I saw several bottles of alcohol and mixed nuts on the table. The snacks they brought to tide them over until my cooking was done must have been from my eldest son and his wife. Mom, bring the roast beef we talked about earlier too. James said, without even looking at me. Like I said earlier, that's ours. Don't sneak any bites. Hearing those words, something inside me snapped. He's really taking me for granted. That's right. Catherine, you know about the fancy plum wine I bought, right? Bring that too, and pour it into the wine decanter. This added command from my husband rubbed me the wrong way. I just couldn't take it anymore. Back in the kitchen, I stared at the brown liquid I had cooled in a small bowl. Are you hungry? The roast beef is ours, so don't give any to Mom. When James said this to me earlier, I came up with a plan and prepared this liquid. Touching the bowl, it was completely cooled. I took James's package from the fridge and unwrapped it. What appeared was unmistakably high-quality roast beef. When I tried a slice, it melted in my mouth, delicious. You'll see. I submerged all the roast beef in the brown liquid. I let it soak for a few minutes to ensure the liquid penetrated each slice, then took them out and dabbed them dry with kitchen paper. I didn't feel like tasting it, but it should be fine. After plating the roast beef, I took out the expensive plum wine my husband bought from the fridge and poured about half into the decanter. A rich aroma rose immediately. A clearly high-quality scent, but I was going to ruin this wine too. I opened the cupboard and took out a 750 milliliters black bottle. Holding it firmly with both hands, I poured the clear liquid from the bottle into the decanter, mixing it with the plum wine. The 3 drinkers in the dining room had no idea about this bottle's existence. They deserved to be ruined. Ruining my eldest son and his wife's visit might seem petty to others. But I had to do this to calm my irritation. I won't let you enjoy the Christmas dishes either. I took out a container and packed exactly half of the Christmas dishes. Up until now, the drinkers ate everything I made, but not this year. I'll take it to my sister's place and enjoy it properly. Then, I'll also enjoy the wine chilled in the fridge. Next, I started tampering with the food for James, Emily, and my husband. I dripped the brown liquid onto the prawn cocktails and mixed it into the stuffing. I spread Tabasco on the roast turkey before serving. If the drinkers notice a strange taste, that'll be a success. Carrying the decanter and glasses to the dining table, the 3 were already happily tipsy. It seems they were drinking wine. Wow, is this the fancy plum wine? Such a beautiful gold color. Mom, could you pour me some plum wine? Emily quickly asked me, then tipped back her cup. Why don't you do it yourself? Come on, do it for her. Annoyed by my husband's words, I obediently lifted the decanter and filled the 3 glasses to the brim with plum wine. Let them drink their fill. Drink and set my plan of revenge in motion. Hey, Mom, you're pouring too much. It's fine, it's a fancy plum wine.
Mmm.
Smells amazing. Emily smiled happily and carefully brought the glass to her lips to savor the plum wine. Wow, this is so delicious. True, you can tell it's expensive by the taste. We 3 can finish this off in no time. We 3. As if I don't even exist. Shaking my head, I returned to the kitchen and then brought the plate of roast beef to the table. Here it comes. This is from a famous local butcher shop. James boasted, hurriedly taking a bite of the roast beef. Then, he grimaced. What's this? It's bitter. Yes. Just the reaction I aimed for. Bitter roast beef? That's unusual. No, it shouldn't be. Are you sure? It's impossible for that butcher shop to make a mistake. Emily said this as she reached for a piece of roast beef. Indeed, it's bitter. Maybe they used some new spices for Christmas. I preferred the previous one, but we have to eat it since it was expensive. That's right. Plus, this plum wine is really delicious. The 3 continued to eat the roast beef I had made bitter and started guzzling the plum wine mixed with the clear liquid like water. After a while, I looked at my husband, George, whose eyes were becoming glassy. Catherine, isn't the food ready yet? His slurred speech was proof that he was quite drunk. I decided to intensify my attack. I took the decanter back to the kitchen, added more plum wine and the clear liquid, and returned to the table. Next, I brought out the big plate of Christmas dishes and individual plates. Wow, prawn cocktail.
Yay!
Like George, James seemed quite intoxicated. Prawn cocktail? Emily, still coherent, reached out with her cutlery and took a prawn directly from the plate. Spicy. She exclaimed. Catherine, what's this? It's spicy. That can't be, I made it as usual. No, it's definitely spicy. Try it, James. Urged by Emily, James also tried the prawn. But I knew that James had always liked spicy food and wouldn't react much to something as mild as Tabasco. Well, it does seem a bit spicy, doesn't it? Right? Oh, and this stuffing is bitter too. Emily, maybe you're tasting it wrong because of the sweet plum wine. I cooked everything the usual way. Except for the brown liquid and Tabasco I added. Still, I think this year's dishes are bitter.
Ah.
Me too. Maybe you're right, Catherine, it's because of the sweet plum wine. But this plum wine is really delicious. As the unsteady George and James continued, Emily was still drinking the plum wine. Could it be that this woman is a bottomless pit when it comes to alcohol? Trying to hold back my irritation, I returned to the kitchen and started washing the pots, bowls, and other cooking utensils. George and James are affected, but not Emily? I muttered to myself while washing the dishes, and then Emily came into the kitchen. Water. I feel sick. Despite having consumed a considerable amount of alcohol, Emily looked pale. Apparently, she felt sick. I filled a cup with water and handed it to her. She gulped it down and looked at me with weak eyes. Catherine, you did something to the food, didn't you? She tried to sound threatening, but there was no force behind it. Even a child could have talked back to her in that state. Please don't say such horrible things. But it's strange, isn't it? I've never felt sick from alcohol before, and it's impossible for James to get that drunk. Just because you feel strange, why do you think I did something? That roast beef wasn't supposed to be bitter. And the prawn and the stuffing were spicy, the roast turkey was bitter. Are you suggesting I poisoned you? Poison, that would explain why I feel so terrible. Emily spoke in a fading voice, then rushed to the sink and vomited violently. Luckily, I quickly lifted the washing bowl, so the dishes were spared. Hey, if you're going to throw up, do it in the bathroom. Catherine, you definitely put something in the food. I don't know what you're talking about. I replied coldly, and Emily looked at me in shock. I've said I didn't poison you. Why would I become a criminal for you? Then why? Oh, water, please give me water. I refilled her cup, and she drank before returning to the dining room. There, George and James were passed out, face down on the table. James, George. Catherine might have poisoned the food. That's impossible.
Yeah.
Dad, and I just drank too much. Wake up, please. The poison is taking effect. Seeing the two of them like that, Emily suddenly started to cry, tears streaming down her face. Her judgment likely dulled by alcohol, she genuinely believed I had poisoned them. I never expected my actions to have such a profound effect. Catherine, please, call an ambulance. I still want to live. I told you, I didn't poison anyone. But it's strange. James and George, who are strong drinkers, are so drunk, and even I, stronger than them, feel sick. Emily, still crying, covered her mouth and headed towards the bathroom. She was surely going to vomit again. Just keep vomiting in fear of a non-existent poison. I had scared my daughter-in-law, who treated me like a maid, right from the start of the Christmas. I had gotten my husband, who was looking forward to drinking, completely drunk. And I ruined the roast beef that James was so eager to have. A feeling of triumphant satisfaction welled up inside me. I packed up the Christmas dishes I had set aside and a bottle of white wine from the fridge into an eco bag and headed to my sister's place. Arriving home, my sister, Michelle, warmly welcomed me and the Christmas dishes. We quickly rearranged the food onto plates and laid them out around the dining table. Pouring white wine into glasses, we toasted as a way of greeting Christmas. And then I shared with my sister everything that had happened back at my house. George and James passed out. But they're usually such strong drinkers. It's hard to believe they'd get that drunk from plum wine. Actually, I tampered with it a bit. You didn't really poison them, did you? Laughing, I assured my sister that it wasn't poison and began to explain. The clear liquid I had mixed with the plum wine in the kitchen was a high-alcohol spirit I won at a year-end bingo game. It's so strong that it's labeled as fire hazard. No wonder they collapsed after drinking plum wine mixed with such a potent spirit, even for heavy drinkers. Eating something that tastes strange and getting more drunk than usual, it's easy to misunderstand that something was done to it, right? Well, only the daughter-in-law got scared, though. How did you change the taste of the food? I used the samburi tea you gave me as a souvenir from your summer trip. I brewed it and mixed it into the roast beef and the Christmas dishes. That really bitter tea?
Oh no.
That makes me sound like an accomplice. Even as she said this, my sister laughed amusingly. It was a small act of revenge without any real poison, but I was satisfied. I was able to release the pent-up frustration and start the Christmas feeling refreshed. Well, if Catherine feels refreshed, that's all that matters. Yes, I really do feel refreshed. My sister and I exchanged smiles and reached for the Christmas dishes on the dining table. James and Emily did not return for Easter. Emily said she hates going back home, trembling as she said it. James told me over the phone when they informed me they wouldn't be visiting. Probably because they were too drunk, they didn't remember what happened during Christmas. Mom, Emily is saying nonsense, like you poisoned the food. Must have been a bad dream, right? I think so too. Meanwhile, my husband, who had ordered beer and wine waiting for the arrival of our eldest son and his wife, spent the holiday drinking alone. His slumped back, tilting a wine glass, looked so dejected and lonely. I thought Emily would never come back, but she arrived with James when autumn deepened. She was pregnant, which was good news, but she was suffering from severe morning sickness and needed someone's help. Emily has cut ties with her parents and has no one else to rely on. Mom, can you help us? Although I disliked Emily, this was a different matter. I had severe morning sickness too when I was pregnant with James. As someone who had been through the same, I couldn't refuse to help Emily. Emily arrived at our house in such a bad state that she couldn't even drink water, let alone eat. I quit my part-time job and started to center my life around Emily, accompanying her to the hospital and taking care of her. Catherine, I'm sorry. Emily said to me one day. There's nothing to apologize for, you're having morning sickness. No, it's different. I treated you poorly, like a maid. And yet, you quit your job to take care of me. Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. Her face showed a look of a daughter relying on her mother. It's okay. It's all in the past now. I said in as gentle a tone as I could, softly touching Emily's cheek. Okay, Grandma, I'm going. Just as I was about to dash out of the house, Grandma called me back. Turning around, I found Grandma smiling and holding a lunchbox. I suddenly remembered I had forgotten to pack it and, with a smile, got the lunchbox. This time, I loudly said, "See you," and Grandma waved.
Goodbye.
I used to always turn left at this alley, but today I turned right. I was so happy in my new shoes. Walking under the blue sky made my heart leap with joy. On this sunny day, I became a middle schooler. My name is Sophie, and I have lived with Grandma since I was little. If Grandma hadn't reached out to me then, I wouldn't be living so freely now. Back then, I felt incredibly alone. My mother, who usually picked me up from kindergarten, didn't come that day. Mrs. Anderson, with a forced smile, was the one who lifted me up as I waited endlessly for my parents. Mrs. Anderson took me to a large, white building. I didn't immediately realize it was a hospital. Someone was sitting on a chair there. When Mrs. Anderson slowly let go of me, with a tear-streaked, wrinkled face, gently embraced me. Afterward, led by wrinkled hands, I entered a cold, dark room where my parents were quietly sleeping. No matter how much I called out, they didn't wake up. At that time, I didn't understand much. But even as a child, I knew one thing. I would never see my father and mother again. That sadness was all that filled my heart. From that moment, my life began to change significantly. I started living with my maternal grandmother. She was the one who embraced me as I cried without understanding. Although Grandma lived on a pension, I never felt poor. Of course, there were times when I felt lonely. It wasn't until I was older that I realized Grandma did everything she could to entertain me. Our life was modest, but it was always filled with smiles. That's why I believe I can dive into this new life without fear. I am truly grateful to Grandma. I must say, my debut in middle school was very successful. I've always been good at studying and generally had good grades. I had good learning skills, and I knew that was one of my strengths. By helping the kid next to me with homework, I naturally made new friends. One friend after another, I was enjoying every day. Then, one day, we had group work in class, and we pushed our desks together to form groups. A topic for discussion was written on the blackboard, and we had to consolidate our opinions for a presentation. The first to speak up in our group was Laura. Her rapid-fire talk was as if she didn't want to give us a chance to speak. As we listened to her, amazed, she started to write her opinion on the paper for presentation. Taking advantage of that, I quickly stopped her and explained my opinion slowly for clarity. Then, gradually, everyone in the group began to share their thoughts. As we discussed noisily, time flew by. In the end, we decided to present an idea centered around my opinion. Encouraged to do so, I presented our opinion as the group's representative, albeit a bit nervously. The next moment, the classroom filled with applause. Mrs. Johnson smiled, saying it was a good presentation. Feeling embarrassed, I looked down slightly to avoid showing my blushing face. Back at my seat, everyone in the group talked to me with smiles, except for Laura, who looked at me coldly. Feeling scared, I averted my eyes from her. And the next day, my school life changed completely. Even when I greeted people as usual, no one responded. Everyone turned away from me, whispering to each other. Confused, a flashy-looking boy, who usually didn't talk to me, appeared in front of me. He came close to me with a sly smile, then opened his mouth wide. "You're just a poor orphan, aren't you?" That single sentence made my spine freeze. It wasn't something I was trying to hide. But his mocking attitude made it easy to guess why I was being ignored by my classmates. And who had started it? The boy, irritated by my silence, started blurting out the rumors. "Sophie is an orphan. She lives off her grandmother's pension, so she's poor. That's why she's always trying to steal other people's things." Because of these baseless rumors, my happy days crumbled away. I had never thought about stealing anything. Ignoring the boy in front of me, I glared at Laura, who was watching from a distance. She pointed at me and giggled with the girls surrounding her. I tried to boost my spirits, thinking I wouldn't let this harassment defeat me. I grabbed the arm of a friend who was trying to avoid me. attempting to convince her that the rumors were a complete lie. But the girls, who had laughed with me just yesterday, shouted, "Don't come near us," and pushed me away. Then they ran out of the classroom. I stood there stunned, as Laura's group laughed loudly. I remained frozen, unable to say anything in return. Only the spot where my friend had pushed me throbbed painfully. The following days were lonely. In the classroom, Laura and her group would come near me and taunt me. Gradually, there was no place for me in school anymore. I was afraid of those who mocked me and those who just watched from afar. With that fear, I couldn't stay in such school. Unable to bear the heavy stares filled with various emotions, I began to spend time alone. Though my world became quiet, the anxiety and loneliness didn't fade. During these lonely days, summer approached. But it didn't matter to me. The friends I was supposed to enjoy summer vacation with had all disappeared. Returning home from school with a heavy heart, I saw Grandma squatting near the flower bed by the entrance. As I tried to enter the house without speaking to her, she said, "Sophie, how was your school?" Even though I didn't respond, Grandma started talking about planting seedlings in the flower bed. "Summer is coming. I wanted to see beautiful flowers with you. I hope they grow straight and honest, just like you." Hearing Grandma's words, I felt a heat rising in my body. I wasn't the honest girl Grandma thought I was. I was just sulking and twisted, without the courage to face things head-on. I noticed Grandma sweating while planting the flowers but didn't care and was about to enter the house, ignoring her. "You don't know anything." I blurted out these words, and Grandma's eyes widened. But then, she smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I might have said something strange again. I'm really sorry." As I watched Grandma apologize, my face grew hot with emotion. I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer. "You don't understand anything at all. I would have been better off in a facility than being taken in by you." My emotions overflowed, not just in words, but in tears as well. Grandma, seeing me cry, approached me in a fluster. At that moment, she lost her balance. There was a small bag of fertilizer at her feet, which she slipped on. I understood what had happened, but I was too shocked to move. Grandma had fallen and was now groaning in pain, curled up on the ground. Even as I rushed over and tried to speak to her, she could only moan, unable to have a conversation. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, I hurriedly called an ambulance. While waiting for help, all I could do was rub Grandma's back as she lay immobile. Later, Grandma was safely transported to the hospital. According to Dr. Thompson, Grandma had broken her leg. Grandma, seemingly relieved by the medication and not in much pain, sheepishly explained to Dr. Thompson that she had fallen while tending to the flower bed. Dr. Thompson smiled, advising her to be careful, but soon turned serious as he examined her. It seemed the conversation wasn't over yet. Dr. Thompson, with a grave expression, began to discuss Grandma's health. He said that the damage to her knees and spine was beyond what one would normally expect. Moreover, it seemed she had also hurt her abdomen when she fell, and the pain warranted further tests, which revealed something concerning, necessitating a re-examination. Grandma, looking apologetic, drooped her shoulders at Dr. Thompson's words. Eventually, losing patience with Grandma's silence, Dr. Thompson questioned why she hadn't sought medical attention when she first felt pain. I stood there, dazed, my mind clouded with thoughts. How had I not noticed that Grandma's body was in such bad shape, despite living with her all this time? She was always smiling and seemed so energetic. Was her deteriorating health because of the hardships I caused? Did she endure the pain without telling me to avoid worrying me? At that moment, I was flooded with questions and remembered the terrible things I had said to Grandma. But I couldn't bring myself to ask these questions or apologize for hurting her. While I was still in shock, Dr. Thompson finished speaking. Grandma would be hospitalized not just for the fracture but until her health fully recovered. "I'm really sorry," Grandma apologized to me. I couldn't say anything back to her, hanging my head in sorrow. Grandma looked uncomfortable in my presence. She observed me closely and then asked if I could buy and gather the things she needed for her hospitalization tomorrow. Grandma, with a smile, suggested that the cheap supermarket nearby would be fine. I nodded in agreement and quietly left the hospital room. I couldn't bring myself to start another conversation. I felt like I didn't deserve to be with Grandma at that moment. The next day, I went to the budget supermarket, just as Grandma had suggested. I shopped, looking at the grocery list I had prepared the day before, and filled my basket with the necessary items. Then, from behind, I heard someone call out, "Sophie," and my body trembled. When I turned around quickly, there stood a boy from my class. I didn't remember much about him, but just the fact that he was a classmate made me break out in an uncomfortable sweat. "What a coincidence to see you here." "Typical for someone poor," he said as he approached me. I felt an indescribable fear towards him. Driven by the urge to flee, I forgot about the basket full of items I was holding and started to run. The boy chased after me, trying to catch me. Thinking about how I would be ridiculed if I got caught made it hard to breathe. It was hard to escape properly in the cramped store. "I'm going to be caught." Just when I thought that, a girl suddenly appeared, twisting the arm that he reached out to grab me. Although I should have just run away, I stood there, dumbfounded, watching the scene unfold. The girl frowned at the boy, who was bothering a girl he didn't know, and he yelled at her to let him go, claiming it was a misunderstanding. Upon seeing the boy's attitude, the girl laughed confidently and scoffed. "Who do you think you're speaking to so arrogantly?" Hearing her assertive words, the boy fell silent. Then, as he seemed to resign himself, he politely asked her to let him go, and she released his hand with a satisfied smile. Afterward, she turned around and asked me if I was okay. At that moment, tears started to fall from my eyes. I was always alone at school. Additionally, I had said terrible things to my only family member, my grandmother, and hadn't been able to apologize before she was hospitalized. At that time, I had no emotional room to spare. Hearing words of compassion for the first time in a long while. The tears I had been holding back overflowed at their warmth. In front of me, crying without saying anything, the two exchanged glances. Then, perhaps out of concern for me, they helped me complete my shopping according to the list I had and took me outside. After leaving the supermarket and finally calming down, I thanked them and tried to leave. But they insisted on following me because they were worried. The classmate was Kevin. The misunderstanding was cleared up by Emily. She looked very mature, but apparently, she was in a different class, but the same grade as me. When I explained that I was going to visit my hospitalized grandmother, they encouraged me and said to let them know if there was anything they could do to help. The two seemed to be childhood friends and looked very close to me. I heard that Kevin and Emily have been in the same basketball club since they were kids, and that Kevin has never played basketball better than Emily. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard that story. It turned out the exchange in the supermarket was about how he had never won against her, yet he dared to speak to me that way. At that moment, Emily looked surprised. Wondering what was going on, she finally asked me what Kevin had done to me. Kevin, while being glared at by Emily, explained that he was just casually greeting me as a classmate. Watching them, I found myself talking. It seemed I had angered Laura and was being teased in class. I was always running away because I was afraid of the stares from my classmates. Come to think of it, this might be the first time I've ever talked about this to someone. After I finished speaking, Kevin seemed to realize my feelings. Then he apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't think it through." It seemed Kevin, busy with club activities, had been avoiding getting deeply involved in the problems occurring in his class. His words in the supermarket were just him trying to say hi after hearing a simple rumor that I was poor. Realizing that Kevin's words had no deep meaning, I also apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for running away suddenly." Kevin smiled and assured me that it was completely fine. As I felt relieved, Emily gently held my hand. Surprised, I looked at Emily, who was looking back at me with a strong, direct gaze. Seeing my confusion, Emily suddenly smiled and said, "From now on, everything will be okay." Honestly, I didn't understand what she meant, but her words lightened my heart a bit. Then, after chatting happily with them, we reached the hospital, and I parted ways with Kevin and Emily in front of the hospital. Feeling it inappropriate to take them into the ward, I watched their backs until they were out of sight and then hurried to my grandmother's room. When I opened the door, my grandmother greeted me with a smile. As I put away the things I was told to bring, she looked at me and smiled happily for some reason. When I wondered why, she asked if something good had happened. I felt a little startled, but when I talked about the two people I met today, my grandmother smiled even more happily. Contrary to her energetic appearance, it seemed she would need to stay in the hospital over the summer. As she said, "I won't be able to see the summer flowers," with a slightly sad smile, my heart tightened. After talking with my grandmother for a while and saying I would come again, I went home to find the flower bed just as it had been that day. The sunflower seedlings by the flower bed had wilted and fallen over. I stared at them for a while, then firmly replanted them in the flower bed, wishing for them to grow straight and bloom beautifully. And I reminded myself that I also needed to properly apologize to my grandmother. Living alone was not an issue for me. I could do household chores, and as long as I managed my finances, there wouldn't be any trouble. But with no relatives nearby, I was unsure what to do. For the time being, I only informed my paternal grandmother, who lived far away, and my homeroom teacher, Mr. Wilson, by phone. The next day. From that day on, I was no longer alone. When Laura's friends were about to tease me as usual, Kevin, from my class, suddenly started making a one-liner joke off the cuff. Everyone's attention turned to him, and the atmosphere of making fun of me disappeared. Moreover, Emily, who was supposed to be in a different class, started coming over, and we often ate lunch together on the rooftop. I soon realized that both of them were protecting me in their own ways. When I thanked them, they just brushed it off with a smile, saying they simply wanted to be friends with me. Still, I was always grateful to them. But this peace didn't last long. During a re-examination while she was hospitalized, it was discovered that my grandmother had developed a gastric ulcer. Fortunately, there was no bleeding, and she needed to fast and be on an IV drip while being monitored. Although my grandmother and Dr. Thompson were relieved that there was no perforation and laughed it off, I was filled with anxiety. When I got home, I looked up gastric ulcers on my phone and felt a pang in my heart when I read that stress could be a cause. My grandma's health problems. I can't help but feel they are my fault. Alone in my house, I curled up, feeling the emptiness around me, and waited for morning to come. The next day, perhaps noticing my pale complexion, Emily invited me to talk on the rooftop after school. I thought that talking to her might lighten my mood, so we went to the rooftop together. Just then, unexpectedly, Laura approached us hastily from behind. I wondered if she had been following us. Laura, with no regard for manners, suddenly grabbed Emily's arm. Stunned and unable to speak, I watched as Laura glared at me and opened her mouth wide. "You know what? Just because you're poor, doesn't mean you can cozy up to Emily, who's rich. It's pitiful to see Emily being associated with someone like you." I felt dizzy hearing those words. I had no idea that Emily was wealthy. Was she approaching me just to spread rumors with Laura that I was sucking up to the rich? While I was lost in these thoughts, Emily shook off Laura's hand. "What are you even saying? I'm with Sophie because I want to be. Aren't you embarrassed by this behavior?" With Emily's firm words, Laura couldn't say anything more and walked away dejectedly. Surprised yet grateful, I thanked Emily for her help. Emily, looking straight at me, then smiled broadly. "I really wanted you to know everything," she murmured, and began to share her story. Emily shared that she had lost her parents when she was young. Now, she lived with her grandparents. Emily's grandfather was the president of a company. Originally, her father was supposed to take over, but her grandfather was still actively managing the business. Emily also shared her dream with me. To take over her grandfather's company as soon as possible. That was her dream. "I'm sorry for bringing this up so suddenly. But I wanted you, Sophie, to know properly. I think of you as my best friend." As she said this and smiled shyly, tears naturally started to fall from my eyes looking at her, Emily. To think that someone considers me, just as I am, their best friend. Quietly crying, I felt Emily gently pat my back. Through my blurred vision, I looked at Emily. I realized I didn't want to keep any secrets from her. Wiping away my tears, I confessed to Emily how I had said awful things to my grandma that day. Emily listened silently to my clumsy story. After I finished, she clearly told me that I would regret it if I didn't apologize properly. As I said yes, she said, "Let's go," and took my hand. Confused, I had no choice but to follow her. She led me to a shopping district. There, in front of a flower shop in the district, Emily finally stopped. The flower shop was manned by Kevin. Surprised to see us, he shared that this shop was his family's business. I took a deep breath to muster courage and asked Kevin for a flower. Kevin looked surprised again but wrapped and prepared it carefully. As he handed me the flower, he asked where I was going. I replied that I was going to the hospital to visit my grandma, and he smiled, wishing me to take care. When we reached the hospital, Emily pushed me forward with a smile. I nodded quietly and headed to my grandma's room. I knocked softly and opened the door to find Grandma looking at a photo. It was a picture of my parents, which she had asked me to bring. Seeing her sad, distant gaze, I took another deep breath and entered the room. Grandma, surprised as if she hadn't heard the knock, quickly hid the photo under her pillow. Then she smiled as if nothing had happened. I wondered how long I had been making Grandma overexert herself. Feeling my heart beat faster, I presented her with a sunflower, her face filled with wonder. Then slowly, I began to say the words I had always wanted to say. Grandma, I'm so sorry for the terrible things I said that day. I was so happy with you. I want to stay with you. So please, from now on, don't push yourself too hard and rely on me. After I finished, the hospital room fell suddenly quiet. Grandma didn't say anything. When I looked up, Grandma, tears streaming down her face, took the sunflower from my hand. Grandma always thought of Sophie as still a small child. The more I tried not to worry you, the more I ended up hurting you. I'm truly sorry. Then Grandma and I hugged each other and cried out loud. Although scolded by a nurse who heard the commotion, Grandma and I just looked at each other and laughed. Then, a busy summer vacation passed. I spent most of it caring for Grandma. Yet, I felt happy that she was relying on me. On the last day of summer vacation, Grandma returned home. Since she promised not to endure pain and hardship silently anymore. She said she would go to the hospital regularly and ask me to share in the household chores. Days of laughter with Grandma returned, and I felt truly happy. As our life together resumed, school also started today. On the first day of the new term, Grandma sent me off with a smile, saying, "Have a good day." Kevin and Emily were waiting for me at the front door. Especially Emily, my truly beloved best friend. Called by Emily and Kevin, I ran out. Near the entrance, the sunflowers in the garden, now fully grown, shone brightly in the sunlight.